Y'all, these are strange days. And I say that not because a fairy princess, a headless henchman, a dancing octopus, and a one-eyed zombie stopped by the rectory the other day on their way to the Halloween dance party at Haley Pond Park. Nor that a swarm of child-sized butterflies flew by, being chased by parent-sized etymologists swinging giant butterfly nets. Nor because two heathen witches lingered behind and threatened a hocus-pocus unless I promised to do them no harm that night. I promised. I also blessed them surreptitiously as they glided away up High Street and into the night. The weather that day was certainly gloriously strange, unseasonably warm, whereas last year's All Hallows' Eve celebration required dressing in layers and wondering whether snow boots would clash with one's costume. This year was an entirely short-sleeved affair. But then how does that expression go? If you don't like the weather around here, wait a minute. These days in between, after foliage season when the mountain dances a brilliant fire dance, and before winter, when snow blankets the hills and a certain hush falls along with the snowflakes. Indeed, town feels quieter these days, after the summer crowds and cottagers have left for the season, and before the die-hard downhillers arrive to ski or snowboard the mountain, or the sledders slide in for this year's snowdeo. A time of transition in the weather as well as in people's lives. The hushed moments between the last leaf and the first flake to fall. I've sometimes heard these strange in-between days called the shoulder season. In northern New England, they're sometimes called stick season after the striking silhouettes of trees without their leaves. Our church calendar and lectionary call them All-Hallowtide or All Saints-tide or even Hallowmas season, encompassing All Saints' Eve, or as my witchy friends would call it, Halloween, All Souls' Day and All Saints' Day, the day we celebrate in our worship and liturgy today. These strange days in particular are a time to remember the dead, including martyrs, saints known and unknown, and all faithful departed believers. What's strange about these days is that they do not necessarily follow the days of the calendar in order. Being one of the 7 principal feasts of the church year, All Saints always falls on November 1st, which was a Friday this year. But if you look in your prayer books, according to the rules of precedence on pages 15 through 18, All Saints' Day may also be celebrated on the Sunday following November 1st. Hence, our liturgy today reflects this movable feast. Stranger still, All Saints' Day wasn't even always in this in-between season, but originated in May, back in the 7th century. A century later, Pope Gregory III changed the date to the one we recognize now when he dedicated a chapel at the Vatican in honor of all the saints. His successor, Gregory IV, later expanding the feast to what we recognize today in our communal worship life, which is now forever made even stranger, because these days are immediately preceded by the sad anniversary of the mass shooting in Lewiston that took the lives of 18 friends, neighbors, and family members. A strange day that we marked here at Good Shepherd Friday before last with tears and prayers in an empty chair's requiem. Similarly, last night we gathered in the chapel for a service remembering all the faithful departed on All Souls' Day, especially those saints of Good Shepherd of blessed memory, sharing stories of our beloveds and communion with each other in the hope and promise of God's love. Indeed, all of these strange days fall in between that hope and promise, in between Jesus' incarnation, his death, resurrection, and ascension, and his second coming, the beginning of a new creation, the new heaven and new earth of which our reading from Revelation speaks. Notably, today is also the feast day of the 16th century theologian Richard Hooker, And although his feast takes much lower precedence than All Saints' Day, it is fitting that we should acknowledge his gift to the Church, that along with Scripture and tradition, there is a third leg that supports our life of faith, and that is reason. Reason, which we will need when we consider not only our assigned readings, but that we hear them on what just might be the strangest of days, this Sunday before the general election, a peculiarly in-between time of anxiety and uncertainty, after days, weeks, months of being faced with a barrage of political punditry over fair and accurate journalism, of ridiculous claims and floating facts, of unimaginably lewd and disgusting words coming from the mouths of candidates, vindictive threats and devolving division, increasingly exclusive so-called news sources, an online algorithm that only encourages ever more radical individualism and finger-pointing. These are indeed strange days. A time of social, political, and cultural chaos, unrest, and division. And in our humanness, we cannot help but be exposed to the socially infectious viruses of fear and worry and anxiety. But we have an antidote to them in Hooker's trio of Scripture, tradition, and reason. For all three tell us that we are not meant to be fearful, but steadfast in love, strong in faith and power, and of sound mind. Neither are we meant to simply sit idly by in these in-between times, but to participate in God's new thing by being a force of love and action, lifting up and affirming the common values of dignity, justice, and peace, even across political differences, opening the doorway for even just the smallest bit of light to trickle in, offering a glimpse of the world to come, to the world that is. We are meant to be the generation the psalmist sings of, those who seek God's face, those who have clean hands and a pure heart, who have not pledged themselves to falsehood, nor sworn by what is a fraud. Lift up your heads, O gates, lift them high, O everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. Through a biblical lens, we need not fear the darkness and chaos of this moment. Scripture and tradition uphold a pattern of creation out of chaos, that with God, disorder and chaos give way to order and peace. From Genesis, when God said, "Let there be light," when only darkness was over the surface of the deep, to the passage from Revelation the lectionary has us considering this morning. See, I am making all things new, a new heaven and a new earth. Reason, Hooker would remind us, would tell us that it is therefore utterly natural and imperative that we should, in all our actions, be directed to the imitation of God. That, as he put it, there is in all things an appetite or desire whereby they incline to something they may be, and when they are it, they shall be perfecter than now they are. That perfection is meant to begin not in our heavenly future, but right here and now. In the New Testament, the word saints, with a small s, is used to describe the entire membership of the Christian community, both this side of death and beyond it. It is in the midst of all these multiple contexts that we hear in our gospel reading that most tender and briefest and remarkable of Scripture verses. Jesus, at the grave of his friend Lazarus, began to weep. In the King James, the verse is but two heartbreaking words. Jesus wept. That evocative two-word sentence, the shortest and most direct in the entire Bible, both opens up and contains the wide landscape of human being, experience, and feeling, and what it means to follow Jesus. It appears only once in the Gospel, in this scene revealed only by John, the raising of Lazarus. The scene is shot through and through with suffering, the suffering of Lazarus in his illness and apparent death, the suffering of the apostles as they struggle to understand Jesus' hesitancy to go and immediately be by the side of their ailing friend, the suffering of Lazarus' family in their grief, the suffering of their outrage that Jesus had not arrived sooner, Jesus' own suffering that is summed up in that hauntingly abrupt verse, Jesus wept. This is a very human Jesus, one who understands our tears and our fears and worries because of humanity itself, his and ours. Upon witnessing the grief of those gathered at Lazarus' grave, Jesus is deeply moved and weeps with them. Before the miraculous display of divine power in the resuscitation of Lazarus, Jesus does something profoundly human, simply and tenderly joining others in their human grief, revealing his true humanity, and that our very humanity matters enormously to God. But the words and image that have always stuck out for me immediately in this passage follow Christ's tears and the miraculous act in which Lazarus is raised. In another amazingly brief but poignant verse, he tells Lazarus' friends and family, "Unbind him and let him go." Jesus restores Lazarus to life, but the man is still bound by the trappings of the grave. Even in life renewed, Lazarus cannot unbind himself, just as we cannot unbind ourselves. We need Jesus to restore us to our true nature. And Jesus commands us that until that ultimate resurrection, we are meant to strip away whatever still binds us. Unbind him, take off the grave clothes, and let him go. The command is directed not to Lazarus, but to his sisters and friends and neighbors. This passage suggests that God intends a world in which we also loosen what binds others and let others unbind us, whether it is from doubt or grief, fear or injustice or oppression. This gospel passage is a gift to us here and now, a message we desperately need to hear in these strange days. For what is most concerning is not that a comedian made several insensitive and grossly unchristian jokes at a political rally, or that a political candidate echoed their sentiment, but that an entire arena of voters laughed at the comedian's joke and cheered on the candidate's collusion. Make no mistake, the politics of hatred and division, of pointing fingers and othering, these are grave clothes, and we are all wearing them. Election day will come and go in a blink of an eye. Whatever the results, we will all wake up on Wednesday morning in a world that is hurting, in need of healing, and bound by the grave clothes that have taken hold of this country. Our work as people who care, as Christians, our work as it always has been, will be to unbind each other and set each other free, to fully embody Hooker's truth that there is in all things an appetite or desire, whereby they incline to something they may be, and when they are it, they shall be perfecter than now they are. What might that look like? Well, it will involve first and foremost the practice of prayer, the particularly Christian practices of lament and forgiveness, thoughtfulness, graciousness and generosity, hospitality and humility, the grace of deep listening and the tenderness of hearts of flesh, the opening of doorways little by little until the light that obliterated the primordial darkness and chaos illuminates every corner of this nation and every saint, known and unknown. And my friends, then the souls of the righteous will shine forth, and will run like sparks through the stubble. And the one who is seated on the throne will proclaim, "It is done. It is done."